My name is Grace Ellington, and at 24, I never imagined inheriting my grandfather's entire empire, only to have my own mother declare, Greg will be running Ellington Holdings. 2 days later, I stood watching my stepfather smirk while the lawyer read the will. Grace Ellington is the sole heir. They thought they'd pushed me aside. They were wrong. Before I show you how I claimed my birthright, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by the ones you trusted most, hit that like button and subscribe to see how I took back control. The moment the attorney unfolded the will, the room turned cold, like someone had opened a window in the dead of winter. I hadn't even finished processing the grief of losing my grandfather, Henry Ellington, when my mother stood up in her perfectly pressed navy dress, placed a firm hand on her husband's arm, and announced with composed authority, from now on, Greg will be running Ellington Holdings. I blinked, stunned. Greg Stanton, my stepfather. The man she'd married less than a year ago. The same man who had spent the past 6 months tossing off hand remarks about how someone, my age, couldn't handle real leadership. I scanned the room, but no one else looked surprised. My uncles and aunts were stone-faced, and even the board members seated near the back offered nothing but polite silence, as if this had all been decided well before the will was read. But there was one glaring issue with her confident declaration. She didn't own the company. I did. A week before the funeral, I had sat beside Grandpa Henry's hospital bed, holding his papery hand as machines beeped quietly around us. Grace, he rasped, barely above a whisper, you're the only one I trust. My chest had tightened, eyes stinging with tears. He was the only person who had ever truly believed in me. My mother had spent most of my life making it painfully clear that I wasn't enough. Don't let them take what I built, he said, his grip firming slightly even in his weakened state. They'll try? Don't be afraid. I've prepared everything. I didn't fully understand what he meant, until now. As the lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, my mother turned toward him, waiting to hear the confirmation that would make her husband king of the empire. Instead, he looked directly at me and stated, according to Mr. Ellington's will, his entire estate, including all shares of Ellington Holdings, has been left to his granddaughter, Grace Ellington. Silence fell like a curtain. I felt every eye in the room swing toward me. My mother's face froze. But inside me, something began to shift. I wasn't going to be pushed aside, not this time. That must be a mistake, my mother said sharply, her voice clipped with disbelief. He meant to leave it to me. The lawyer remained calm, unshaken. I assure you there is no mistake. Grace Ellington is the sole heir. Effective immediately, she owns the company, the estate, and all financial assets. For a moment, no one moved. Then Greg let out a short, humorless laugh, like the whole thing was a bad joke. Sweetheart, he said, turning toward me with that condescending smile I had come to loathe. You can't be serious. A company of this size isn't a college project. It requires real-world experience, not ambition and optimism. I didn't answer him. I simply held his gaze, watching the cracks begin to form in the calm veneer he always wore. My mother's face twisted, not in confusion, but in fury. If that's how it is, she spat, then pack your things. You're no longer welcome in this house. I stared at her, stunned. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped my lips. You mean Grandpa's house? I asked, shaking my head slowly. You might want to read that will a little more carefully, Mom. Something tells me you missed another surprise. Her face turned a pale, furious white, and her lips pressed into a hard, bloodless line. Greg stood beside her, shifting uncomfortably now, as if unsure how much ground he actually stood on. I had expected pushback. I just hadn't expected it this fast, or this blatant. You're joking? My mother hissed, her voice low but laced with venom. Dad would never do this. Never leave you everything and cut me out completely. The lawyer cleared his throat again, clearly prepared for this moment. Mr. Ellington made his intentions perfectly clear. Grace is the sole beneficiary. She is now the legal owner of the estate, including the family home, all investments, and 100% of Ellington Holdings. The truth was, I was still trying to absorb it myself. I had known about the company. I had suspected something unusual, but the entire estate, even the house we were standing in, I wasn't ready, but I was no longer afraid. My mother must have realized the same thing I had, because her expression shifted from disbelief to something colder, something calculating. "If that's the case," she said, her voice suddenly composed and razor-sharp, "then you can leave. Today, this is no longer your home." The room went so quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. I blinked, processing the sheer absurdity of what she'd just said. Did she really think she could kick me out of a house I now legally owned? I exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to laugh again. "Mom," I said, my tone even, "I think you're confused. This house, it's mine now. Grandpa left it to me. Everything. That includes the land, the house, and the title." Her jaw clenched, and I could see her trying to find the right words, the right spin, but nothing came. Finally, Greg stepped in, his voice all false warmth. "Grace," he said in that silky tone that always felt rehearsed, "you're young. You don't understand the kind of pressure a business like this puts on someone. Your mother and I, we've lived in this world for years. We know how to handle it. Let us help you." And there it was, the real plan spoken at last. This was never about grief or legacy. It was about control. They had assumed the company would go to my mother, that she would sign it over to Greg, and he would step into power. I was never supposed to be a factor, and now that I had become their biggest obstacle. I crossed my arms and looked directly at them. "So let me get this straight," I said calmly. "The moment you realized you weren't getting the company, Mom tried to throw me out of my own home. And now you want me to hand over control of Ellington Holdings because you think I'm too young to manage it. That about right?" Greg's smile wavered. "That's not what I'm saying," he insisted, still trying to mask his panic. "I just think—" "No," I cut in. "I think you've made yourselves very clear. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a girl fighting for approval. I felt like the woman in charge." My mother's hand slammed down on the table, the sharp sound ricocheting off the wood, paneled walls. Her composure cracked, desperation flashing behind her eyes. "You don't know what you're doing," she snapped. "This isn't just some family trust fund, Grace. This is a billion-dollar corporation. You can't run it just because your grandfather believed in you." I stayed silent, but the lawyer didn't. He adjusted the stack of documents in front of him, speaking with the calm precision of someone who had been waiting for this moment.
"Actually, Mr.
Ellington anticipated this very concern. He made arrangements prior to his passing to ensure a smooth transition for Grace. My mother whipped her head toward him. "What arrangements?" she demanded. "He appointed a team of senior advisors," the lawyer explained. "Trusted executives who will oversee company operations during the transitional period. Grace has full authority as CEO, but she won't be navigating this alone. The board has already been notified. All legal documents were finalized and filed weeks before his death." Relief bloomed quietly in my chest. Grandpa had planned for this. He knew they would try to corner me, to overwhelm me into giving it all up. He'd built a wall of protection around me, and now that structure was beginning to hold. Greg's expression darkened. The friendly mask had slipped, revealing the tightly coiled anger just beneath the surface. He leaned toward my mother, whispering something sharp, but I caught it anyway. "We can fight this." The lawyer, without missing a beat, responded, "You cannot. The will is airtight. There is nothing to contest." I watched the last sliver of control drain from my mother's face. For years, she had dismissed me, belittled me, made sure I knew I would never measure up. She had never imagined a world where she wasn't in charge. And now, she had nothing. Her voice lowered to a hiss. "You think this is a win? You think you're ready for this? I stared straight at her, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I guess we'll find out. The tension in the room was unbearable, a suffocating weight pressing down on everyone present. My mother's glare didn't waver, her manicured fingers curling into fists on the gleaming oak table, while Greg sat stiffly beside her. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching. This wasn't how they had pictured it. I had been a nuisance in their perfect plan. Easily ignored, conveniently dismissed. The naive girl they thought they could manipulate into silence. But Grandpa had seen through them, and that's exactly why he had chosen me. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice shaking with tightly controlled rage. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her tone strained. "My father would never cut me out of everything. I'm his only daughter." "Why would he do this?" I turned to the lawyer, wondering the same thing. Grandpa and I had always been close, but I hadn't expected him to leave her with nothing. The lawyer exhaled slowly and folded his hands on the table. Mr. Ellington anticipated this reaction. He left a letter with specific instructions that I read it aloud. Should there be any confusion, he pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase, broke the wax stamp, and opened it carefully. The room was silent as he began to read. "Grace," the letter began, "if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And by now, I'm sure your mother is outraged. She'll say it's unfair. She'll say she deserved it. But the truth is, she lost that right a long time ago." I looked over at my mother. Her face had gone rigid, her lips pressed so tightly together they were almost white. "Your mother always believed money equaled power," the letter continued. "But she never understood that power comes with responsibility. I gave her every opportunity to grow, to lead, to earn. But she chose shortcuts. She chose comfort. She believed being my daughter entitled her to the fruits of my labor. But entitlement isn't the same as worth." The lawyer's voice didn't waver, and I realized something. This wasn't just a will. It was a verdict. A reckoning my mother never saw coming. The lawyer kept reading, his voice steady, unwavering, even as the words sliced through the room like knives. "And as for Greg," the letter continued, "if he's standing there right now, I imagine he's doing his best to look supportive. But I know who he is, a leech. A man who saw an opportunity in my daughter's bank account and seized it. I won't let everything I built fall into his hands." I glanced at Greg. His face had flushed a deep, angry red, his lips drawn tight, though he stayed silent. Whether it was shame or fury, I couldn't tell. Probably both. The lawyer rayed on. "Grace, you are different. You never expected anything from me, and that's why I chose you. You worked hard. You asked questions. You respected the business for what it is, a legacy, not a paycheck. I saw the way you listened, the way you absorbed everything like a sponge. You reminded me of myself when I first started. You're the only one I trust to carry this forward." My throat tightened, my heart pounding with a mix of pride and sadness. He had been watching all those summers when I followed him to the office, shadowed his meetings, took notes, while my mother dismissed my interest as childish curiosity. He'd seen me, really seen me. The lawyer continued, "This won't be easy. Your mother will try to fight you. Greg will try to manipulate you. But remember this, I didn't leave you unarmed. I left you with the tools to win." Then he folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and looked up. The silence in the room was thick and final. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. Her shoulders stiffened, and she said through gritted teeth, "This is absurd. He was old. He wasn't thinking clearly when he wrote that." The lawyer didn't even blink.
"Dear."
Ellington updated his will 3 months ago. He was of sound mind and body. There is no legal basis to challenge it. Greg shoved back his chair suddenly, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "We're wasting our time here. Let's go." But my mother stayed seated, her eyes fixed on me, seething. She didn't move, not right away. My mother just sat there, staring at me like I had stolen something sacred from her, something she believed was hers by default. "You really think you can handle all of this?" she asked coldly, her voice as sharp as glass. "You think you're ready for it?" I met her gaze, steady now, unflinching. Yes, that night I barely slept. I wasn't afraid, at least not in the way I used to be, but the weight of it all pressed against my chest like a stone. I was 24, barely a month shy of 25, and I had just inherited an empire. I didn't have the luxury of easing into it. No buffer, no runway. Just a title, a target on my back, and the memory of my grandfather's voice telling me to be brave. The next morning, I pulled into the private lot of Ellington Holdings, corporate headquarters. The building stretched upward in glass and steel, familiar and intimidating all at once. This wasn't just a company. It was a symbol of everything my grandfather had worked for, and now it was mine. As I stepped out of my car, the heels of my shoes clicking against the pavement, I heard someone call my name. Grace. I turned and saw them standing just outside the main entrance. My mother and Greg. Their expressions were unreadable, masks carefully put in place. "We need to talk," my mother said smoothly. "Just the three of us. No lawyers, no board members. Just family." I almost laughed at the irony. Now they wanted to invoke the word family, after trying to erase me from my own future. But I didn't walk away. Not yet. Some small part of me wanted to know what their next move would be, what angle they'd try. 5 minutes, I said flatly. That's all you get. We ended up in a small conference room on the executive floor, neutral ground. Greg sat down like he owned the space, his posture relaxed, while my mother stood stiffly with her arms crossed, her eyes never leaving mine. Whatever they were about to say, I already knew one thing. It wouldn't be a peace offering. "You're in over your head, Grace," my mother began, her tone soft, almost gentle now, as if she'd suddenly remembered how to play the nurturing card. "Grandpa put an impossible weight on your shoulders. It's not fair to expect someone your age to run $1 billion company. No one would blame you if you stepped back." I smiled faintly, already seeing where this was going. "And who would step in if I did?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Greg," she said without hesitation. "At least for now, he has the experience. You could learn from him." I leaned back in my chair, studying them both. "So I become the apprentice while Greg runs the empire." Greg smiled, calm and rehearsed. "Not exactly. We're suggesting a partnership. You'd remain the public face, the CEO in name. But I'd handle day-to-day operations. You wouldn't have to deal with the stress, the long hours, the pressure of board meetings or making difficult calls. You'd have freedom." I stared at him. "You want me to be a figurehead?" I said, no inflection, just fact. "It's the smartest path forward," my mother added quickly. "The board will feel reassured. You won't be burdened. Think of it as protecting Grandpa's legacy instead of risking it." There it was, beneath all the sugar-coating fear tactics, manipulation, and their attempt to claw back control under the illusion of helping me. "And what do I get out of this?" I asked, mostly out of curiosity. Greg's smile widened. "A generous monthly transfer from the company's revenue. You'll never have to worry about money again. You can travel, live your life, enjoy your inheritance without the stress of running a corporation." It was bold. I had to give them that. They truly believed I would trade legacy for comfort. "And if I say no?" I asked quietly. My mother's expression shifted, her mask slipping. "Then you'll face pressure from the board, from investors, from the media. You're not ready for that kind of scrutiny, Grace. You'll be alone." I tilted my head, noting the threat disguised as concern. "So you'd sabotage me," I said. Greg didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. I took a slow breath and stood, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. "Thanks for the offer," I said evenly, "but I'll take my chances." My mother shot up from her chair, panic leaking into her voice. "Grace? Don't do this." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin just enough to sting. Do you really think you can win? She hissed, her voice low and trembling with fury. You don't understand how this world works. Your grandfather didn't do you a favor by handing you this company. He put a target on your back. The board will devour you. The investors will question your every move. You need us. I pulled my hand free calmly. No, Mom, I said, my voice low but steady. I needed you when I was younger. I needed you to believe in me, to support me. But you never did. You wanted me to fail, just so you could take what wasn't yours. But I'm not a scared little girl anymore. She flinched, just slightly, but it was enough. Greg stood too, his patience clearly wearing thin. You're making a huge mistake, Grace. Don't come crawling back when it all crashes down around you. I looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that says I'm done playing nice. I won't. I left them standing in that sterile conference room, their illusions unraveling. But I knew that wouldn't be the end. I could feel it in my bones, they weren't finished. And I was right. 2 days later, I walked into my first official board meeting as CEO expecting a challenge, maybe some passive resistance. I wasn't prepared for the full-scale assault. The moment I took my seat at the head of the long glass table, the air changed. The board members, mostly older men who had served under my grandfather for decades, looked at me not with curiosity or courtesy, but with skepticism. Before I even had a chance to speak, Mr. Brewster, one of the senior members, leaned forward with a tight expression and said, Grace, before we begin, I think we need to address the obvious. I met his eyes, ready? And what would that be? Mr. Brewster exchanged glances with 2 other members seated near him, then folded his hands in front of him like a school principal about to deliver bad news. Your grandfather was a remarkable businessman. He began, his tone polite but laced with condescension. But let's be honest, his decision to put you in charge was impulsive. You're young, inexperienced, and while we all respect his wishes, there's concern about your ability to lead at this level. I kept my face composed, even as my pulse began to rise. Concerned about what, specifically? I asked. About your leadership, Mr. Brewster replied, choosing his words carefully. You've never held an executive role, never led a division, never managed a corporate crisis. The optics alone are troubling. At the far end of the table, Mr. Carrington glanced at his phone and let out a subtle sigh. The media's already on this, he muttered. The headlines aren't doing us any favors. I discreetly reached under the table for my phone and opened the news app. The first article hit me like a slap. Ellington Empire handed to inexperienced heiress. Industry experts predict trouble ahead. The next, from granddaughter to CEO overnight reckless, or revolutionary. And the worst $1 billion gamble, can Grace Ellington handle the pressure? My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Sounds like someone's been feeding the press. The board murmured quietly, a mix of discomfort and intrigue. The meeting dragged on, tension building with every subtle jab, every sidelong glance. By the time it ended, the company's PR team had called me 3 times. I returned to my office, locked the door, and played their frantic voicemails. Grace, we've got a situation. Stock's down 3% since the news broke. Someone inside the company is leaking statements questioning your credibility. We suspect it's coordinated. The board's already discussing a vote to reevaluate leadership. I sat down slowly. A vote. Already. This wasn't just public doubt. It was sabotage. And I didn't need a detective to guess who was behind it. My mother and Greg were trying to finish what they couldn't achieve through the will. They wanted to take me down before I had the chance to lead. I should have felt overwhelmed, cornered even, but instead, I felt something sharper: focus. This was their play, and I had seen it coming. They hadn't been able to control the outcome of the will. So now they were going after perception, hoping to turn the board and the investors against me before I ever had a chance to prove myself. But Grandpa had told me to be ready, and I was. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found the name I'd been saving for this exact moment. It rang twice before a smooth, familiar voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. I exhaled slowly, relieved. I need your help. Ethan Ward, my grandfather's longtime business partner. A financial strategist, with a reputation for resurrecting dying companies and gutting corporate corruption like a surgeon. He had mentored Grandpa for years and, more importantly, never trusted my mother or Greg. Let me guess, he said dryly. They're coming for your head already. There's a vote in 2 days, I told him. And the media's already tearing me apart. I need to flip this. He let out a low whistle. Classic boardroom coupe. All right. Grace, let's remind them why your grandfather chose you. That evening, I met Ethan in his private office on the 35th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. It was all glass, chrome, and confidence. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Here's how we play it, he said. Step 1, investor support. I still have contacts loyal to your grandfather. We'll get them to speak up publicly before the vote. Step 2, control the narrative. You'll sit for a carefully crafted interview. Humanize your story, highlight your work ethic, and emphasize the trust Henry had in you. Step 3. Expose the sabotage. I have people who can trace the leaks to their source. If Greg or Victoria had anything to do with it, we're going to bury them. By the time we finished, it was past midnight. I stood, shaking Ethan's hand, more grounded than I had felt since the will was read. Thank you, I said. He grinned. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we wipe that smug look off Greg's face. The next morning, the headlines began to shift. Grace Ellington to speak out. Exclusive interview set to air tonight. Investor groups rally behind young CEO, citing trust in late Henry Ellington's judgment. Who's behind the smear campaign? Sources point to internal sabotage. The tide was beginning to turn. I arrived at the office early. Greeted by curious glances and hushed conversations, but for once, they weren't dripping with doubt. They were laced with uncertainty, maybe even respect. By noon, my calendar was cleared for the board meeting. It would be held in the executive conference room, just like always. Only this time, my future would hang in the balance. When the hour arrived, I stepped into the room in a fitted navy blazer, heels clicking against the tile with deliberate calm. The long table was already full. Mr. Brewster sat at the head, flanked by the rest of the board. They straightened when I entered, eyes narrowing with interest. Before anyone could speak, the doors opened again, and in walked Greg and my mother. I wasn't surprised. This had been their plan all along. Greg walked in like he owned the place, offering polite nods before taking the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we're here because we all care deeply about the future of Ellington Holdings. I know Grace has inherited this role under unusual circumstances, but let's be honest. A company of this size requires experience, vision, and strong leadership. With all due respect, she's not ready. He smiled at me as if that softened the blow. That's why I propose we reassign the CEO position temporarily. Grace remains as the public figurehead, while I oversee operations and ensure stability. He sat, looking far too pleased with himself. I let the silence hang just long enough to make them wonder. Then I spoke, calmly and clearly. That's interesting, Greg. Because I remember you saying something very different in private. His eyes flickered. I turned to Ethan, seated at the far end of the table. He slid a thick folder across the table. The documents inside, I said, detail emails, calls, and communications showing Greg attempted to undermine the company by contacting competitors and leaking internal information. The room exploded in stunned murmurs. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore, it was betrayal. Mr. Brewster opened the folder and flipped through the contents, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Around the table, the other board members did the same, their expressions hardening as the reality set in. What is this? Brewster asked sharply. Ethan answered for me, calm and matter of fact. Proof that Greg Stanton has been working against Ellington Holdings. attempting to broker deals with competitors, spreading damaging narratives to the media, and positioning himself for a hostile takeover. Greg stood abruptly, his voice loud and defensive. "This is absurd. You can't prove anything." "Actually," I cut in, "we traced the IP addresses. The source of the leaks. A private email account linked directly to you." Murmurs turned into outrage. My mother shot to her feet, her face pale with fury. "Grace? Stop this now. You're just trying to make him look bad because you're scared." I turned toward her, my voice calm. "I don't have to make him look bad. He did that himself." Mr. Brewster's palm hit the table with a sharp thud. "Enough," he snapped. He turned to Greg, his tone ice. "You've jeopardized this company while pretending to save it. That alone disqualifies you from any leadership position here." Greg's mouth opened, then closed. His confidence crumbled. "It's time to vote," Brewster said. One by one the board raised their hands. Every single one voted in my favor. Unanimous. I had won. I watched as security escorted Greg out of the building. My mother followed him seconds later, pausing only to turn back and hiss, "You'll regret this, Grace." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because I knew the only thing I regretted was trusting her for as long as I did. That evening, Ethan joined me in my office, a rare smile curving his lips. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply. I nodded. "Thanks for believing in me." He stood, stretching. "Go enjoy this. You earned it." 1 year later, I stood at a podium addressing a crowd of shareholders and reporters. They said I was too young, that I'd fail. But success isn't about age, it's about preparation, resilience, and the courage to rise when others expect you to fall. The applause that followed was deafening. And for the first time, I didn't just carry Grandpa's legacy, I had built my own. Sometimes, the people who doubt you the most are the ones closest to you, but their disbelief doesn't define your worth, your courage does. When someone underestimates you, let that be fuel, not fear. Stand tall, even when your voice shakes. The road to becoming who you're meant to be is never handed to you. It's earned in silence, resilience, and every brave choice you make. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. What moment hit home the most? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind you what you're truly capable of.